I travel occasionally and enjoy trying to bag new AM broadcast band and sometimes shortwave stations from locations away from my home. I travel light, so small radios with good performance are important. In this video, we're going to look at a new acquisition, the C. Crane CC Skywave. Other videos and numerous websites discuss all the radio's features, and you should look these up to learn more about the radio. We're going to look at how this radio compares with a favorite of mine, the Grundig G5, which is a popular portable radio generally recognized as having solid AM and also shortwave performance. This won't be a direct measurement of sensitivity, but rather an estimate or a demonstration of how these radios compare on the AM broadcast band. Let's get started. First, a few impressions. The Skywave is a light, solidly built travel radio. It's 5.5 ounces without two AA batteries. It covers AM, FM, shortwave from 2.3 to 26.1 megahertz, the weather bands, and the air traffic bands between 118 and 137 megahertz. It's very small. Essentially, it's the same size as another of my favorite travel radios, the Grundig G6, but it doesn't have the degenerating sticky rubberized coating. That said, the plastic on the Skywave is not slick and it's not difficult to hold. The buttons are clearly labeled and easy to see. There's a tuning knob and a volume potentiometer, which I prefer to buttons. The essential operation is generally intuitive, though you'll need to read the instruction manual to get the most out of your Skywave. The antenna is small. The whip is 16 inches long, but that's appropriate for a radio this small and this light. With the antenna extended, there's no danger of it falling over. In general, the radio has a great form factor for a travel radio and performs well. The biggest ding I have on it is the omission of an external antenna jack. Also, I don't find the FM sensitivity terribly strong. The G5, for example, is much better at pulling in low power and neighborhood FM broadcasters than the Skywave, though I haven't been especially rigorous about investigating the FM performance. Overall, this is a capable radio, one I've taken on several trips and found to be solid on the AM broadcast band, and amusing on the shortwave bands. I say amusing because in a cement hotel, there's a lot of absorption. The 16-inch whip just doesn't provide a lot of signal for the radio to sink its teeth into. I've watched and read a number of receiver videos over the years, and what strikes me about many of them is that they, very pragmatically, tend to be critiques of performance based on real signals on the air. This makes a lot of sense because, after all, you use a radio to hear actual RF signals. I'm always left wondering, though, about the effects of changing signals, multipath and ionospheric reception that changes over minute or sub-minute timescales in the case of shortwave. In order to evaluate one receiver relative to another, in this video we're going to use a signal generator to produce a constant signal that is coupled into the receivers of interest at several different frequencies across the AM band. We're going to do this in order to see how they respond to a common, unchanging, controlled signal. Here's the setup. I used a Siglent SDG 2040X waveform generator to drive an amplitude-modulated current into a short piece of wire. You can hear that on the crane right now. You might be able to hear it's not a pure tone, it's warbling a little bit. And it's actually warbling a little bit because the radio is tuned to AM 1070 at the moment. And AM 1070 has a very, very weak signal that we will return to at the end of the video and see how the crane performs receiving that signal relative to the other radios. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So I use the Siglent to produce a single frequency amplitude modulated carrier wave. And then I place the crane and then the Grundig G5 in the same spot on the bench, and I orient each one in turn so that the signal is at its strongest. And then I adjust the voltage, the peak-to-peak voltage of the signal on the Siglent downward. And I take it all the way down to its minimum, which is 2 millivolts peak-to-peak. And at each frequency then I increase the peak-to-peak amplitude of the wave, and I listen through a pair of earbuds to each radio, and I record the voltage at which I can first hear the signal. We'll start at 530 kilohertz, and then we'll go up to 650 and 760 and so on and so forth through the AM band. I've picked these frequencies because there are no stations active on them right now, and they're relatively clear. I've picked the Grundig G5 as the gold standard because, one, I've got one. Two, the G5 is generally acknowledged as a very capable radio for AM and shortwave reception in this size class, although the G5 is a bit larger. And three, it's my personal favorite, and psychologically I'll always compare any travel radio to the G5. More powerful signals were needed to be heard through the noise at the lower end of the broadcast band than at the higher end. The G5 was able to hear signals with smaller peak-to-peak voltages overall, but the C-Crane Skywave was comparable across all frequencies except those below 650 kilohertz. In fact, the lower end of the AM broadcast band is generally noisier than the top at my location during daylight hours. It would be interesting to try the same experiment at night, which might be quieter from a noise perspective, but then of course you must compete with AM broadcast stations. Overall, the numbers suggest that the Skywave compares favorably with the G5 as far as detecting the presence of signals is concerned. That said, detection in this experiment says nothing about intelligibility. For that, I looked at two reasonably hard targets. AM 1010, which houses WOLB about 50 miles away, a station that is licensed for 250 watts during daylight hours. On the Grundig 750, it's audible with very low signal strength, as long as the antenna is oriented correctly. On the Grundig G5, it's noisier and on the edge of intelligibility, but on the C-Crane, it's not intelligible at all. With a loop, however, it's intelligible on both the G5 and the Skywave. Just to demonstrate this, here is a close-up of the Satellite 750, and I will just so you can hear that it's noisy at this location. 250 watts doesn't buy you a lot, and especially we're downstairs in the basement. But that said, you can actually understand what is being said. Now, let's look at the Grundig. So here is the Grundig G5. And if I orient it in the correct position, might be a little difficult to hear, but there is a signal there, and one can actually understand at the edge of intelligibility what they're saying. So now let's do the Skywave. So I'm going to tune this in. And you can see when oriented in the same way, I get lots of signal, right? So you can really hear the null. Get lots of noise. But I think you'd be hard-pressed to understand anything being said. Okay. So that really illustrates the relative performance on this frequency anyway, midway through the AM broadcast band of these radios. As another example, there's WPDD, which is a low wattage AM station with multiple transmitters throughout the county in which I live. This is a station that is a government station, and it transmits transportation management information continuously. The audio is poor even when the signal is strong, but let's tune that in now. That's at AM 1070. So that is just on the edge of intelligibility there. It probably comes across worse in the microphone on the camera, but in person, standing here, I can understand some of the words, even despite the low audio quality to begin with. So let's see how the G5 does. Don't get a lot of directionality out of this. This is right on the edge of intelligibility as well. Let's see if the loop helps at all. So we get a big boost in power right there, in signal. And right about there, it digs the signal out of the noise enough that you can actually understand what's being said. Barely. It's right at the edge of intelligibility. Let's try the Skywave now. Here's a Skywave on 1070. And again, you can tell that there's a signal there, but it's not anywhere near being intelligible. Let's just see if this helps at all. And in fact it does, it helps a little bit. It's hard to understand here, but I suspect that through earphones you could probably just make out what they're saying. Alright, well, so there's that. There's the C crane. And again, the Grundig G5. Not a lot of difference. The crane is a bit noisier. There's no way on earth you would be able to understand this signal without a little bit of help from a loop or from an active antenna. On the Grundig, it's just right on the edge of intelligibility, but the point is that there's not a lot of difference. This is just on the edge a little south of intelligibility, and this is just on the edge a little north of intelligibility. Well, what's the upshot of all this? First of all, the C crane Skywave is a nice little radio. The lack of digital noise across the broadcast band relative to lesser radios is refreshing, and the sensitivity seems pretty good. Second of all, it does seem to provide a lot of noise in the audio compared to the Grundig G5, but I have no way of making that a quantitative statement, and I don't mean to imply that it's a problem. Third, it couples quite nicely to a loop, which you probably don't want to travel with, but it's nice to know for home use. And lastly, having used this radio on a few trips so far, I like it a lot for AM listening. Overall, I'm not entirely blown away by the Skywave. Don't get me wrong, it's a very nice radio. It has great features, and the performance to size ratio is very large. I recommend it, but it's no Grundig G5. If you have any experience with this radio, please comment below. I hope you found this interesting. If so, please give it a big thumbs up. Thanks for watching.